I'm happy to welcome you all to BIC and Videshilp University Public Lecture Series. And I'm happy here to introduce Professor Ajit Mishra, long-term friend, colleague, and co-author. He's a professor at University of Bath, where he heads the Department of Economics. Ajit's journey starts from Delhi School of Economics, where he earned his master's and PhD. And from then, he moved to Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, an advanced research institute established by Reserve Bank of India in Bombay, where I think both of us joined almost the same day, if I remember, way back in June 1993. Then, after spending a few years at IGIDR, Ajit moved to Scotland to University of Dundee, and from Dundee, he then later moved to University of Bath, where he is currently professor and the chairman of the Department of Economics. Ajit has published a lot in this area. Many of the important fundamental papers are written by Ajit, particularly, as she pointed out, the hierarchy of corruption, how do you model it, how it is important, and why those strategies have to be somewhat different. You have to move a little bit outside law and look into the design of law. And that's what I think Ajit would most likely will touch here in the anatomy part, I guess. Over to you, Ajit. We have around 45 minutes.
Thank you, Babu, and thank you for the invitation. And again, thank you all for coming on a Monday evening. I must start with a couple of remarks about the topic and this thing. Corruption wasn't my first choice. When I asked Babu, I gave him a couple of other suggestions about talk. Yes, I have worked on corruption, and I've moved away somewhat from the typical economist way of looking at corruption, so which you will see in a moment. And secondly, I always dread talking about corruption uh, in a public lecture setting, especially in India. And partly because, the audience knows more. At times, they come up with, wonderful observations, and also have very high expectations. My first lecture or talk on corruption was a very technical game theoretic model, which Babu referred to way back in 1992, I think, in National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, NIPP. So I did, I thought I did a great job, solve the model, do these things. Then a gentleman stood up and says, "So what do you think? How can we eliminate corruption?" I was clueless. I didn't even answer that question. Obviously, things have changed now. Today's focus will be on anti-corruption studies. But if, things don't go well, it's Dr. Babu's fault, not mine. First, why the development context is important here, why it matters. So quickly, by the way, the poster was excellent, is excellent. And, the introduction to the topic was very nice. In fact, it's very good. I don't know who wrote it, but, I liked it. In fact, I kind of saved my lecture according to it. So it's not the other way around. Okay. So the negative impacts of corruption on development have been studied quite a bit in the last 30 years or so. It is widely accepted. So that's, but more importantly, the causation also goes from the other direction, at least according to some people. So high levels of corruption invariably associated with low level of development. Okay, so if you just look at, put the per capita GDP of countries on one side and look at, some measure of how corrupt they are on the other side, you will find a very strong negative. So the developed countries tend to be less corrupt or are perceived to be less corrupt. So which means, a thought might come to our mind, is development really the answer to it? Why do all these strategizing, all these rules and regulations, all those things? Let's focus on the process of development. Sooner or later, we'll be out of it. And this is not the only debate, we can have in the corruption context. There have been debates, for example, child labor in the UK. Okay, child labor was prevalent quite a bit in the UK, 18th, 19th century. Now, so people say whether child labor was eliminated, was it because of the legal intervention, the laws, which ban child labor, or it's the sheer, industrialization, the development, and the fact that opportunity costs become more. So the returns to education, when it goes up, well, that's when you realize that it's not worth sending your child to a factory. So similar, we can uh, talk about this. But my reservations about such a line is that it's not quite so similar. Why? Because I feel process of development itself creates rent for expropriation. Okay. I mean, India is developing, right? Because I leave it to you to see whether there has been a substantial decline in corruption or no decline at all or an increase. Okay. But the fact remains that, as a country is developing, as the GDP is increasing, there will be scope for rent attraction and bribery and corruption. And secondly, as I will visit later on, many of these developing economies, which is what we will be referring to or talking in that context, they may not possess the resources or the institutional structure, which we economists will assume when we say, oh, we're going to implement this mechanism, oh, we're going to implement this. Okay, so that's also a factor. So in some sense, just to round it up, so these developing or the poorer or the less developed economies are the ones where we see more corruption. They are the ones where probably need the maximum intervention, okay, because corruption, as we know, controls growth. But that's the one also where it's the most difficult to implement these strategies and to get rid of this thing. So it probably still makes sense to talk about anti-corruption strategies in this context. Okay, so this is in general why I talk about this. I know I haven't defined corruption as yet because, as I said, we know roughly what we mean by it. It's the misuse of public office for private gains. Okay, more on it later on, but I don't want to spend too much time on this. And I will be talking about corruption or bribery without specifying the context, because as we know, it can take different forms, and that's probably something we're going to skip. So it can be, two people colluding. It could be somebody being extorted, or it could be simply siphoning out public funds. Okay, so all these are classified under that, but I'm not going to make a distinction. In fact, one of my or a couple of papers that we did was essentially saying that how it becomes difficult to target corruption when you have these subcategories or these different facets. Okay, because something which might work for collusion tends to encourage extortion. So we have those problems, but we're not there as yet. Okay, just quickly to say, it's not a new problem we are talking about, and it's been around for a while. That's an understatement. I kind of particularly like this wonderful book by Noonan. I don't know if it's here in the library. If not, it should be. Bribes: The Intellectual History of a Moral Idea. It's all about these things, and it really traces back all this. And the reason I'm mentioning Noonan's work here is that he compares bribery to two other, issues, that's slavery and usury. Okay, and in some sense, showing that how they were also equally aberrant. Okay, they were equally prevalent at certain points in time, and how the society or how the civilization got rid of them. I know some form of modern day slavery probably still exists. We still have the problem of very high interest rates. Okay, but in some sense, we can say that they are not there anymore. Okay, we'll come back to Noonan's project right at the end. And we can skip this unless you're a big fan of Arthasastra. I have some. This is a quote which everyone makes. Okay, and so even then it was thought that it's inevitable. And at the same time, in the next it says that it's inevitable, but also it's difficult to get rid of. Okay? So in some sense, we knew these problems many years back. Okay, well, it was then, and from routine to headlines, you can pick up any issue. Just Google this or anything, which is what I did. BBC corruption, and okay. So that's right. Around Christmas, I'm supposed to remind, before Christmas, I'm supposed to remind all my colleagues to make sure that they have passed the anti-bribery training module. Okay, so this is what the university does, that we must all pass that module, which basically says, do you know about the bribery laws? Do you know about these? Do you know about that? Blah, blah, blah. So you cannot complain later on saying that I wasn't aware of it. And we have to declare, or I at HOD has to declare if my colleagues received any gift in excess of £50 during the year. So yeah, so it's all in the news. And these are the headlines. You can see. You can't see probably, but it's all there. So in some sense, it's been there. Fine. Different societies have gone through different waves. They have come down. And if we see, I've given one Nicolas Sarkozy's this thing. It doesn't mean that the French society is corrupt. So this is not to suggest the kind of corruption we are talking about. But in fact, this will be one of my conclusions in the saying maybe some of these we can never avoid. Okay, the stakes are just too high, and there are people who will have the power and opportunity to do it, so they will be done. But that should not be the focus so much. Okay, and this is another. Fine. So let's get back to saying this. So here is something which matters for development, people who worry about development. Here is something which matters for developing countries. And here is something which has been around for quite some time. Okay. So let me just spend 2-3 minutes trying to isolate this phenomenon. Okay. So isolate what we mean by corruption from other things. So that's when we can analyze it better for the rest 35-40 minutes. Now, corruption is based on the notion of having an intermediate layer in any agency relationship. Okay. So it's your politicians, let's say, that's one agency relationship. Okay. And there is an intermediate layer. So let's say these are the government officials. So that's one agency relationship. It could be that, the government, the National Health Service, and citizens of UK. So that's an agency relationship. But there is an intermediate, person, agent. I'm going to use the term agent. They are in charge of maintaining this agency relationship. Okay. So it's the intermediate distance. Government collects tax from us. Okay, so we are the agents, and government is, let's say, I'm going to use the term principal. Okay, so one side of the relationship is principal, the other side is the agent, and in between we have the intermediary, or what I'm going to call the supervisor. Okay, it doesn't have to be the factory kind of supervisor. It's just I'm using a term for that particular individual. Okay, so going back, so let's say the government, whoever it is, HMRC for me is the principal. I'm the agent. I'm supposed to pay tax, and the tax inspectors, okay, HM revenue inspectors are the supervisors. And you can name all sorts of things. And in fact, as the society gets more and more complex, as it gets more diversified, we have more and more agency relationship coming. Okay, the basic definition, which we normally use in classroom, is agency is where we enter into an agency relationship where your welfare depends not just on what you do, but also what I do. Okay, so in that sense, the interdependence is brought in. And you can see why in a modern society we'll have plenty of that. Okay, so that's why it's going to be very important for my talk in a short while. So we have, let's say, 3 players, I'm going to call it. Okay, the person who is the principal, it could be the government, it could be the head of regulatory authority, or it could be us. Okay? So we can be the principals who, and the elected official could be the agent. Okay, they are supposed to represent our interests. So we'll have these 3, and typically we would define corruption, okay, as the interaction between this intermediate layer, the supervisor, and the agent. Okay? And that's been the classic definition in beginning with Susan Rosa Ruckerman, or even before that, Gunnar Medel, although not in so many, formal or well-defined terms, but that's the idea. Okay? So we'll be the supervisor is in some sense on focus, or the middle player, or the intermediate layer. Now they are contractually obliged, or they have entered into a contract with the principal, either formally or informally, or explicitly or tacitly, to carry out certain action with respect to the agent, okay, which we call duties. Okay, so you collect the income tax rightly, you monitor, you do policing rightly, you monitor pollution rightly, all those things. And if they deviate from there, okay, so that's when we say corruption takes place. It can be applied all through differently. You just need to keep changing the definition. Okay. And see, that's why sorry. That's why I say we don't talk about, let's say monopolists, they make a lot of money. Especially these days, we have a tendency to see more and more monopolistic practices coming up. And they, of course, charge exorbitant prices. So we have a different term for it. Okay, so they're profiteering, they're doing something, antitrust activities and stuff like this. But we don't call it saying that, oh, such and such, firm is a corrupt firm. Okay, so that's less different. Okay, now so this is my only economic slide. If I don't do it, the economist in the audience will feel bad. Okay, so given that definition, so here is enters Gary Becker, not just a Nobel laureate, but one of the more influential thinkers. Okay, so Gary Becker would say, of course, we can sort this problem. Okay, how do we do it? Well, the solution to corruption will be, okay, we create incentives, create a mechanism, do something so that this chap is not going to deviate from the public duties. Full stop. That's the simple problem. Economists will be very happy to solve that, and that's what we do. So what do we do? Well, you can, if you don't like those inequalities, ignore it. All we need to do is that, so why we are asking, here is a rational individual, the intermediary, why he or she should do this, deviate from public duties, while if the net gain from doing so is greater than the cost of doing it, or the gain from doing so is greater than the cost. So it's a typical economic cost-benefit model that we can deviate, we can make it bigger. If you like saying, oh, how can be talking about just the monetary cost or monetary gain? No, you can include all sorts of other things. Okay, so I want to help somebody who is somebody's friend's son. So the benefit that I get is probably not in monetary terms. It could be in kind. So that's also I can fit in here. And if I get caught and if I'm penalized, the society will look at me in a different way. So there is a social cost, a moral cost to it. I can include that also. So essentially saying that we can, this has opened up the door and we can start filling in the boxes. And that has been the dominant paradigm. Okay, and that's what I'm summarizing here. I know I'm generalizing a little bit, trivializing a little bit, but that's essentially it. So we're going to solve that simple inequality that we must make sure, we must create conditions such that the expected net gain from engaging in bribery should be negative. Okay? So we do all sorts of, so I can in fact classify all the strategies, all the different anti-corruption policies into map into this. So, as I said, design of incentives, as it was mentioned in the introduction also, and also to go with it, this is important, we often keep it outside, because we also need the institutional and the governance structure to implement, the first one. Okay? So it's one thing to write down that equation, but how we implement, and we'll see more of it. Okay, so that's what I mean by anti-corruption strategies. Now, these are the observations in my talk, which I'm going to say that, and that's what the anatomy which Dr. Babu was referring to. So what I'm going to propose that, might sound a bit too generalizing, but that's just, because of time and I'm having to simplify. So we might have erred on the side of ignoring all heterogeneity. Okay, so this is nice because remember, pre-Becker or the early writers on corruption, economists would say that, oh, these are all, our homo economicus. Okay, so we all maximize our expected profit or expected utility or expected satisfaction and stuff like this. And we are honest to the core. Okay? So there was never any discussion of, misrepresentation in the sense that I described. So corruption wasn't there. Okay. Now, when these people started introducing that, no, that can happen, people can deviate from their prescribed duties or public duties, we went to the other extreme. We assumed that everybody is like that. Okay. The way the tax laws are also planned or designed, it assumes that everybody is a potential tax evader. Okay. So as if you take out sanctions, then people will start evading tax. Okay. You apply for something, a passport or anything, everybody is a potential criminal. Okay. So we have jumped to the other extreme. That the world is full of dishonest and corruptible people. So I'm going to say that, I mean, fine, it's okay for a simplification, but it has led to undesirable outcomes, the implications of anti-corruption strategy, or this thing has created a very highly inefficient outcome. So that's one, and I'll try to convince you. Less so on the focus on extrinsic motivations and regulatory solutions. Okay, so that's also something. It's my reading of the recent literature. I mean, not just recent, last a couple of decades. We all talk about monetary incentives. Okay, and we know that there is now a literature that extrinsic motivations, where I'm giving you, let's say, monetary payments or stuff like this, that can have the tendency to crowd away intrinsic motivation. Okay, I mean, we have famous examples. Remember in fact, the story in England, so where people used to go for voluntary blood donations, but once the payment started for it, that if you go and donate blood, you'll be paid for your time and effort, donation dropped. So that's normally taken. I know it's not proved beyond what we would like, but that extrinsic motivation will have a tendency. And there is now a huge literature in the organization context. So that's probably has affected us also. And also what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit about behavioral persistence. So some people are going to be corrupt. It doesn't matter how you design strategies, it's not going to be easy. There's something. So it's like, individuals are different. People will have different barriers, different thresholds, different moral costs, and stuff like this. So you cannot design a policy for each and everybody. Okay? So that's where I think we went too far. So what happens if you have this behavioral persistence? So what I'm going to argue is that maybe we should also look at selection. Okay. Because right now what you do is we get some people into the organization, so selection is ignored, or selection is based on something else. And then we try to see, okay, so now that you are all here, now that you all have scope to be corrupt, I'm going to introduce certain incentive schemes so to make sure you behave honestly. Okay? I know it sounds very difficult. It might sound crazy also. But in some sense, pro-social behavior can be part of your first day selection itself. Okay, that's just a thought. I'm going to give an example of a study. I'll tell you, you will see why I've chosen that study, okay, for this audience. There are other challenges of implementing these strategies. I'll briefly mention. And if I had time, I would talk about the legal challenges, which is what we are working with some of our colleagues on mens rea considerations in the bribery context. So, which is basically saying that to in criminal this thing in law, you need to prove the intent. Okay, so if I give you a whatever money to, let's say, Dr. Babu, I should have, so the quid pro quo has to be established that I'm doing it with the intention that I will receive some benefit. So that has to be there. And if we cannot prove this, well, in that case, we cannot call it corruption. Okay. The last one, we won't have time, so I'm not going to touch it. Okay, so this is, as I said, whole list of anti-corruption strategies, right? Anything that you can think of, or most of the what you can think of, will be here somewhere. Okay? But that's again essentially solving that in a simple inequality. So I'm trying to make your expected gain from it low, and the expected cost from it high through all these different things. Okay, I'll skip that one. But this I want to mention, so there could be some other approach also. Remember, there I simply said that all we want is to make us honest. Okay, so that's what 90% of the literature is all about. How to make sure that these officials do not take bribe. Uh, get rid of the intermediary. Okay? With technology developing, we probably can have solutions like this. Remember, now tax administration is almost automated. Benefit reimbursement, you don't need the intermediary layer anymore. So probably with AI automation and stuff like this, we might be receiving or we might be reaching a state where we can get rid of the intermediary state. So which means there is no scope for corruption to begin with. And the other one, which is less popular or less obvious one, is that, well, ignore it, live with it. Okay? Because remember, your initial objective was to get, the policy that you want the agent to do something. Now, if you can achieve that objective, irrespective of whether the intermediary is taking a bribe or not, it doesn't matter. Okay? And so this is I have a paper with Dilip Mukherjee, and we like it, but we also realize that it's not so difficult to implement. I mean, this idea came to me from my student days in Delhi University. With due respect to Delhi Traffic Police, I would say that we knew that when we were students, if we drive, in the night and start speeding, we'll be caught. Some of us without helmets, no license, all sorts of things. But we knew that we never have to pay bribe. Okay, we'll just pay whatever. I don't know whether 100 rupees probably was too big, but some amount and get away with it. But still, it acted as a deterrent. Okay. Why? Because you don't want to pay a bribe, because that's all, in some sense it's the sanction. Okay, so you're still, there is an expected cost to doing that act, and for poor students that itself is substantial. So it would deter some of us at least. And so what Dilip and I would say that, well, if you make the penalty high enough, okay, so that the bribe also is going to go up. Remember, if your penalty is 500, that chap is going to charge you 50 rupees. If it's 1,000, it's quite possible that bribe will be monotonic in the size of the penalty, so it's going to charge you more. So I can find a fine function which is big enough so that I'm making you pay exactly what you would have paid in the absence of any bribery. Okay, so it's possible. I mean, I'm not saying that's what exactly government should do, but that also suggests that we should be clear about what our objective is. Okay, it's not to get rid of this bribery per se. It will be good. It's a good moral objective, but at the same time, let's see if we can get the desired outcome through some other means. Okay, so that's. But we won't talk about it now. Whatever I mentioned in the slide, the one before, giving you highways, giving you sanction, giving you reward, all is conditional on one thing, that we need to find out the corrupt act or some other act. So to implement that, you need monitoring. Okay, we simply say that, the probability of being caught is something, and we just leave it at that. You need all sorts of things, and this is where Babu referred to also our earlier work. So you can talk about, whether the monitoring has to be hierarchical or it's peer monitoring. There is a literature on it. So when a village, villages are building, or road is being built in the village, whether we should have somebody coming from the district town to come and monitor, or it should be a local panchayat doing the monitoring. Should it be internal or external? Okay. Should it be random or expected? In some of the Latin American countries, pre-election there will be random audits, okay, of how some of the federal funds have been used, and they will be published. So that's random, and people adjust their behavior. I mean, random, but it's orderly. You don't know whether you will be audited or not, but you know roughly that if elections are going to be in December, then you will be audited in June. So we can discuss all these things, but it's a very central role. But we ignored the role of technology, how that will change it, the cost and complexity of it, and as I'm going to say in a moment, the nature of information. Okay, I will skip this one. I don't want to get into this. Okay, so that's in a nutshell. So you have this strategy, you have the institutional structure of the technology to implement, and technology, let's say it's the monitoring part. That's just one aspect of it. Okay, how do we detect? Okay, so here is you would have seen this code. Give me a firm place to stand and a long lever, I can move the earth. Okay, the famous Archimedes code. People use it in different contexts. So here, essentially, I'm saying, if I'm in a corrupt organization, if I say that, oh, all I need is an honest officer, okay, and with some probability, if that person can detect corruption in the organizations below him or her, and then we can choose sanctions so heavy that even with a tiny probability, if you are caught, your expected cost can be very high. Okay? So I need that honest person, which is Archimedean lever here. If I can get a fulcrum outside the earth where I can put the lever, and then I can twist it. But I may not get that. And that was our paper, not inspired by that, to see that, what happens if the entire hierarchy is corrupt. Okay, so that was the work with Professor Basu and Sudipta Bhattacharya. So that's one. So we have to live with this. And this is very unique to corruption, by the way. Second issue is the nature of information. Okay, how much of this information that we get about a bribery or corrupt act is soft or hard? What is soft information? Soft information is something which cannot be easily verifiable. Okay? And in this social media age, that's probably 99% of all information we get on the social media is soft. But this is, I'm talking about, actual reports and stuff. So if information is soft or can be soft, we have other problems. Okay, then we have to cope with what happens if the policeman comes, catches us and said that I know you were speeding, over speeding, and well, there is no proof, nothing. It's their word versus our word. So that's what I mean by soft information. Okay, it can work both ways, by the way. You find somebody. You collect evidence. In fact, these days, even if there is hard evidence, you can use repeated messaging and stuff like to make it soft. Okay, we must have seen plenty of things where somebody is caught napping. You complain saying, no, that's political. I've been politically framed. Okay, even the politician who got jailed in the UK, I can simply talk about UK here, because of bribery allegations or charges which were proved against the Russian state, would say exactly the same. That a former politician is being framed for things he or she did. So that's again, you hard information. There is a tendency to make it soft also. So if you have soft information, then whatever our strategy that we did, whether it is. And the last one I mentioned, legal and implementation challenges. We probably won't have time, but so in some sense, it's fine to have all this strategy. I know it's always safe when something hasn't worked. We can always come back and say that, oh, it wasn't implemented properly. There is nothing wrong with the policy. It's all the implementation. Okay, but that's why I don't want to take that route. I want to talk about the policy as such. Okay, so this is the mainstream part. There is a long list of surveys where they have talked about different policies adopted. We don't need to visit them, but all I can say is that I've also surveyed this literature. In fact, the actual policies, this is a nice change. Do follow the academic literature pretty closely. So in the sense, it's not as if policymakers have been doing different things. Okay, and we mentioned institutional reforms. So we have had quite a bit also. Okay, we can talk about it if you're interested in this thing. You can see these numbers are very impressive. Okay, so for example, countries with anti-corruption agencies in 1990 there were just 12. Okay, we're talking about 114 in 2022. The last time I checked in 24, it was 120 plus. Okay, countries with RTI, India included. Okay, again, very few in this thing. So in some sense, yes, there have been a lot of institutional reforms. Some have worked, so I'm not saying that it is a blank slate. Okay, I can come back to it. What has worked and what has not. And it has worked in. I mean, this one is interesting though. I don't know what your view about Right to Information Act, RTIs. I know it has worked, and this is a beautiful paper. I like this one. Okay, and they in fact did document and causally establish why the right to information has improved things. But when I was the IZ director, I had mixed views about RTI. The amount of time I used to spend, this is off the record, on responding to RTI requests for completely frivolous things just to keep, harass the director was no joke. Okay. And I'm sure at that, in fact, I remember at time the court also was not too happy about some of these RTI requests. Okay, so it can have its negative this thing, but yeah, we know few things have worked. We know some of the reward schemes also have worked. Okay, but as it worked, again, we can look at different countries. I have some information. We can check. Some countries have done wonders. Not wonders, that's too strong maybe, but have done well. Okay. So these are these things. Fine. Okay, back to my the anatomy part. So remember I said few observations. So this was the first observation, that we probably went too far in the opposite direction of assuming that everybody is dishonest, everybody is corruptible, and so on and so forth, which is fine with an economic decision-making paradigm. Okay? But when we looked at with Andrew Samuel some of the cases where we ignored the fact that there are firms which comply, or individuals who comply with the law, who pay their taxes obligations. Now, so when you ignore those people, okay, then we end up with highly ineffective anti-corruption policies. I'm going to show it at the bottom. Okay, just to give you an example, this is not the entire spectrum. So when there is soft information and when the supervisor cannot distinguish, okay, so it should be, there's a typo there, between a non-compliant and compliant. So there will be a tendency to put everybody into the process. Okay, and so in that case, what will happen? Remember, I said the Becker this thing. The enter Gary Becker, and all we had to do is to reduce the cost of reduce the gain from bribery or corrupt act, and increase the cost of bribery. Now I have to contend with one more, because even if I'm honest, even if I'm a complier, I might end up incurring some cost, because the system is geared towards such a way that I might be misreported, I might be not penalized. Let's hope the courts are doing a good job, but there will be substantial cost. So which means now I'm going to compare three things: the gain from engaging in the corrupt act or the non-compliant act, the cost of it, that is if I get caught and then if I'm sanctioned. But the third one, that if I stay innocent, there is a cost also. Okay? So you've got to factor that down. So in some sense, my gain from non-compliance is increasing effectively. Okay? Because I'm comparing not with zero, but I'm comparing with something negative. That is, if I remain innocent, I'm incurring a cost. And that has very bad implications. So in that sense, forget your incentives, forget those probabilities of detection, the monetary technology, your rewards, your sanction rates, and stuff like this. If such a thing were to happen, okay, depending on the extent of this kind of harassment, we could end up, or the two societies can end up in two different situations. So one could be a low corruption, high competence, high compliance state. Another could be exactly the opposite: high corruption, low competence, and low compliance. So that's a big problem which we. Okay, so remember here you can see the red of A. So I'm introducing heterogeneity there. Okay, so in the sense taxpayer, I'm assuming some are honest. Now let me move on and introduce heterogeneity here. So not all supervisors are dishonest to the core or corruptible to the core. So there are some honest people. If we introduce, moral costs of corruption or self-control cost, okay, this is a new thing. I don't know if you like it. So it's like, I know that I should be vegetarian. I know PZ is, so it's not an issue for him. For health reasons, supposing I should be a vegetarian. But if I go to a nice restaurant selling non-veg stuff, I'm tempted. Okay. So that's the control costs in some sense. So I'm ordinarily an honest person, but if something is passing on my table, which I know that nobody is going to look at, it's not harming anybody in any case, nobody is going to suffer. I'm not trying to harm a poor person of the society. I can think of all sorts of justification, which are essentially, self-control problems. Yeah, I'm happy to take that bribe. So if you have those self-control costs, what do? Well, you try to pre-commit. Okay, I'll refuse to go to a restaurant which offers both veg as well as non-veg menu. I'll go to a vegetarian only restaurants. Okay, and here also, what will I do? Well, I'm going to tie my hands with lots of rules and regulations, okay, which will make it very difficult for me to deviate from honesty. And in fact, Andrew and I, we wrote a paper in 2024, very recent, saying that doing so, if you will end up with very low levels of discretion in the society. Okay, we know that our bureaucrats do a wonderful job, but they need some discretion also. Okay, if everything is going according to what's written out there and what's prescribed, then we may not be achieving, uh, efficient economic outcomes. And in fact, that's what this thing. And this was not liked by many of our colleagues. Why? Because traditionally in the corruption literature, red tape is associated with bribery. The idea is that bureaucrats or officials will increase the amount of red tape so that they can extract bribe from you. Okay, so that's how red tapes and bribery have been clubbed together. This was saying that it's exactly opposite. You could have that even with honest officers. Okay. Okay. Another these things. I love this paper by Bandera and others. I'm just spend a minute. Am I done, Babu? No. I still have 5 minutes. I have 5 more minutes? Okay. Or if more, you can tell me. You don't have to be shy about it. So this is a study done looking at procurement by public bodies. Okay, so it could be university, hospital, local governments, ministries, of standard items over a period 2002 to 5. I mean, I had first-hand experience from IG also, because we also used to do that. I mean, I'm sure in many government this is the same. So you have a list. I'm forgetting the name of it. So you buy it from there. So that's fixed price and everything is stipulated. If it's not there, you can go to the open market and buy from different vendors. So that's what I'm calling parallel procurement. So market, suppliers, and Consip. Consip is the designated supplier. The interesting thing, those who do empirical work, is that here the item on concept list can be uh, delisted at some point in time. Okay? So let's say, a mouse, whatever, clicker, let's say. Clicker this year is on the concept list, but let's say next year it's delisted. So you buy it from market suppliers. Okay, so we can have this thing. So which means for the same item, I can get listed price when it was on the concept list, and I can get the open market price when it was bought. So you would expect, if there is a lot of corruption in the procurement business, that I take money from you if you're trying to sell me this, and I pay you more, and you give me a cut. Okay, so that will be the typical bribery here. So you would expect prices to go up when an item gets delisted. Okay? And that will be called active wastage, because we're wasting this thing on this good through corruption. Okay. But we can also have passive waste, which is sheer inefficiency, where officers' income is not affected by the decision they make. Okay. But I could simply buy, I pay a high price for low quality goods or something similar. So there is no corruption here, but an inefficient outcome. So that's they are calling passive waste. Now this was shocking. Okay, and they have done lots of reverseness checks. So even if it's not 82, it's something substantial. While both types of waste are present, passive waste accounts for 82% of the total waste. So what from the outside we look at, oh, those bunch of corrupt guys, when it gets this thing, they're doing this. No, it's the other way around. Officials worried about the signaling value of high price often try to buy at the cheapest without bothering about the quality. So that's the inefficient decisions you're making. You're worried that, if I buy at a high price, you'll be viewed in your department or by others that you must have taken some. Okay. Fine. So this is in that same series, O1. Okay. So now let's look at the principle. Remember, I said HMRC, the tax authority, the government, whatever. Like for the other cases, we tend to assume that they're all dishonest. Here, we always assume that they're benevolent, right? They want the best for the society and so on and so forth. Now, what if anti-corruption strategies are used by P for other purpose? Okay. I've asked a student of mine to see how many coups were done in the history. They were carried out to overthrow corruption, but only in the name. Okay, I could do that. P can develop cronyism, target political opponents, and leading to more corruption despite higher levels of anti-corruption efforts. Okay. So that's also something which can put anti-corruption strategy under the scanner. Okay. So again, I've given you a series of examples. This is not exhaustive. Where I hope I have convinced the point that if we take into account individual characteristics and allow for some heterogeneity, we might end up designing different policies. Okay. Now, this is the last one. I promised the last one. What about behavior persistence, which I mentioned? So here you can't do anything. Okay. You can't create a good enough mechanism which will prevent these people. And there are, again, sizable literature. What I'm going to look at is this one. Can we do something about selection? This is not the only study. There have been studies done in Bangladesh, in other many parts of countries. And this I chose, and I must say, Remahana and Wang, because this was the study was done in Karnataka and in Bangalore. Okay. In 2012, 2013. So that's when they collected the sample. So they basically did a lab experiment. There were 6 higher education institutions. I don't know whether Vidya was involved or not. And so essentially what they were trying to do is make students play the game and trying to link that with their career aspirations. Okay, where do they want to go? You might say, I don't believe in it. Firstly, it's a game. Students know they may not be serious and stuff. All those things are fine. Any kind of behavioral experimentation will suffer from those kind of problems. And so, what is the dishonesty part? Well, we are supposed to roll this dice, six-sided, 1 to 6, and you record the outcome. So I get 1, I tell them, okay, and I get paid 50p for that. I roll the dice, I get 3, I tell them, or I record it, I get 3 times that. So I get 1 rupee 50p. I say 6, I get 3 rupees. And you do it 42 times. Actual outcome is not observed, okay, but you can deviations from honesty can be recorded. So some of them say it's 6 all the time, okay. Which I want to be generous to them. So it's not necessarily dishonesty. They are playing a game, so they're just gaming, right? Whereas in a real life situations, if there is an opponent, okay, they're dealing with who is human, they might be honest. In fact, we tried to write a paper on what happens when humans are interacting with robots. Okay, will there be altruism? What would mean other preference mean? How would this in dishonesty, honesty play? Okay, thank you. Okay, so which means we can detect, let's say, dishonesty, and then what they would say is that dishonest individuals, as measured by this, show a preference for entering public policies. My apologies to bureaucrat friends. This is not the only thing, but there is this. Okay, I know it's. I don't want to make too much of it. They say we did some validating experiment also with government nurses. So in the sense, it's not just your preferences or plan, but also they surveyed nurses working in government hospitals where it's viewed that the form of corruption could be absenteeism. Okay, so in the sense you take pay for not doing your work and stuff like this. So they tried to get that record and made them play the dice game, okay, to see whether there is a positive correlation between those who are extra absent, okay, or who are using absenteeism falsely, and those who are dishonest in the dice. So they would claim, and there is a bit more now. There's this kind of thing, and in cross-country level also, okay. And so it's fine. So in some sense, so maybe we closed our eyes just to sanction-driven, strategic these things. We should have considered other behavioral issues as well. Okay, I'm going to finally, well, all I'm saying is, I'm still a very optimistic person. We may not be able to get rid of all forms of bribery because of various pressures and various constraints. But at least the target should be that the basic goods and services common citizens should be immune from. I mean, I know UK there is plenty of corruption at some stage, some level. We see from convictions and stuff. But you don't have to worry about this kind of basic goods and services. I know things have improved, but when Babu invited me for the talk, I also realized that I've been trying to sell my late father's land in my parental district in Bangalore for more than 1.5 years. The file just doesn't. I don't know what the reason is, but obviously I'm not going to pay any bribe. So that's one, but we should have at least at that level. That should be clear. The thing that I didn't talk about, how technological revolution will impact. Okay, I just briefly mentioned agency settings, stuff like this. Hopefully that will be. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Shankar Prasad. I run a NGO called Sampurna Swaraj Foundation, and we bring technology into governance because that's the topic that you missed. You said for the next talk, so I'll take the opportunity to say, I think it's very possible to bring technology to minimize. We call it workflow automation. That means where a citizen is part of the supply chain and he actually sees what is happening. And we have implemented that kind of action items in villages, or what we call gram panchayats in India. Okay, so technology is a possible approach because you have complete transparency to the citizen of what is happening inside your local government. So when information is available to a citizen, he can take action. And bureaucrats, so we look at not just bureaucrats, it's politicians, bureaucrats, and judiciary in India. Judiciary is as bad as anybody else. So that's the reason I thought the best way would be to bring technology. So I just thought, since I'm here, just show you. We wrote a 600-page book. Okay. Okay. Because all of us who are in Bangalore, we know this is called Bangalore Land Mafia, Labyrinth of Corruption. And the latest is e-Khata. I don't, those of us who are dealing with e-Khata, you know, it itself is a fiasco. Though the technology has been brought, if the technology is not completely integrated, then it again becomes another option for corruption. So these are some of the issues. And so I just thought I'll show that to you. So this is a book that's coming out next week. It is how do we use technology to minimize the labyrinth of corruption in our country? And that's what we have done for almost 15 years. We have worked in Bangalore to bring this kind of ideas into civic entities, but mostly in gram panchayats.
Shall I respond?
Sure.
I mean, just all I can say is thank you. And that's what I hinted at the beginning, that I tend to learn more from the audience than I can these things. I'm not surprised that you managed to do that. You know, in the sense technology, it's although I didn't touch on it, yes, you know, I've seen examples of that happening. And remember, early on, I did make a saying that how technology has changed that game, that is removing the intermediary. So that's essentially what you have implemented. So we don't need that intermediate steps.
Not just intermediate.
Yeah.
Those of us who are technologists, there's a technology called blockchain. I think those of
Yeah.
us who know software, blockchain is probably the best
Thing.
technology in order to make sure that all the transactions are
Solved through that. Yeah.
soundproof.
Yes.
And that is what I just showed that to you. I'm not trying to sell my book.
Yeah.
Please. So we call this rebooting democracy in gram panchayats, where we have brought all those technologies into local governments.
Yeah.
So I'll be very.
So yeah, here.
Oh, sorry.
So wonderful lecture. Just had one question. When you mentioned that Gary Becker's equation and how you reduce cost by introducing rewards and sanctions, how you reduce that, that's wonderful. But I just had one question about the infamous Indian bureaucracy, and specifically something like the police services, where the entire hierarchy is corrupted. And you took the famous example of Delhi police. I think everyone's aware of that. So when something like that happens, when even the monitoring or the audit facility is available, but even they are in cahoots, how do you tackle something like that? That is one question I had.
I mean, as I said, so that's something we that was the problem, the Archimedean problem, which I pointed out, saying that if I get an honest person in the hierarchy, I can do something, or a subset of honest people. So if entire hierarchy is corrupt, this mechanism is not going to work. Rather, you can have technology, let's say. So in the sense, without, let's say, in the UK, if I'm overspeeding, you need to give me evidence for anything. So you need to have that. The speed cameras should be working and stuff like this. So that's just to give you a tiny example. So technology has become that solution. Without that, you don't get punished. In fact, post-COVID, it all went down. Why? Because most of the cameras were not working, so people were free to speed. But yes, that is the problem. There is in literature, people say, "Oh, let's look at an elite force, or let's create an elite force." Okay, remember we heard about the Indonesian KPK or something, which was an elite anti-corruption force. They could, but even that collapsed 2012 or something. One of their leader was also found to be corrupt. So that's a difficult we don't.
Hi, sir.
Hi.
Thanks so much for the lecture. I'm a health economist by training. My question was on the passive waste sort of analysis that you showed. I wanted to ask if you had any understanding or you thought that the analogy of the L1 bidders problem in India. So it's a big problem. The cost of doing nothing, which bureaucrats actually just go for the lowest quality bidder because it's the one that will ask them least questions of, like the public will. So is that something you've studied? Is that something I would think it would show 82% or maybe 90% of inefficiency if that's analyzed?
I've studied in other contexts and I have first-hand experience. I don't know if I should say this publicly. So when I was the IG director, we would do this bidding. It's a government institute, so you can't do anything without this thing bidding. And I know the bidding was rigged. Okay, so one of my officers will tell them that sir has gotten one bid today, which is this. I don't know how they know. So that was first. So it was not a proper auction in that sense. And secondly, even though they will show a sample page, I know that it's very poor quality. But how do you prove quality? Okay, my officers will tell me that said don't even try to do that. Okay? Because there will be RTIs, there will be cases against you, and stuff like they will just nail you for this simple thing. Just go for the cheapest. And like a duty bound, I went for the cheapest. Okay, you won't like to see our annual reports, right? Because the contents are fine. Babu has seen, he was our honorary, he was a member, but the quality is pathetic, and that's what you get from this thing. So it's widely prevalent. You see, and that's what happens. I couldn't talk about trust today, but just hinting, because our obsession with active waste management, there is no trust in the society. As I said, we start when we meet a person, our prior is that person is dishonest. Okay, and especially when the transactions with government officials. So when in a low trust environment, obviously everybody wants to play safe, and that's where we.
Question on that. Would it be possible if analysis like yours would show that there is so much leakage or so much waste by this behavior? So maybe there could be regulation that says that the L2 is by default the bidder that we go with, or something to that effect, which kind of removes, because of this element of chance, you can't really keep corrupting every bidder that's applied, and so at some point the buck will stop.
Yeah, I agree with you on there, but just a little change at the beginning. I won't say bring in more regulation. We are already over-regulated. I will reduce some of the regulations to give that little freedom that you can choose something which is not the lowest price, but do it. The best example of over-regulation is, India is bad, but not so bad. US Defense Department procurement regulations for oatmeal cookies for their defense staff, it runs into 130 or 150 pages. How the cookies, the specification. And you use that to these things. I mean, which will be good these days with automation and AI. You probably don't need anybody to do the procurement decisions. It will be automatically done. I mean, I don't know. It's probably it must be prevalent here also. The big firms don't do shortlisting anymore by themselves. They just feed it into them.
So today, according to the law, both the giving and the taking of a bribe are illegal, and so that basically means that both parties to the transaction have a vested interest in concealing the instances of bribery. I believe this was actually tried in one country, some Scandinavian country, that the giving of a bribe was made legal, and only the taking of a bribe was made illegal. I don't know how that shifted the incentives and what was the result of that. I was hoping you could comment on whether that would be an effective strategy in your opinion.
I know this was very controversial when Kaushik Basu was the chief economic advisor, so I don't know if I should get into much to it. But the short answer is that yes, it will make a difference. Okay. And going back to whatever is in the public domain, for certain kind of bribe, it should make a difference, or it should be done in the sense if it's you are being forced to pay a bribe because it's an extortion demand, okay, then why should you be quote unquote? But the reason is we don't want to create a law like situations here that all extortion bribe payment is legal. In that case, it will encourage more extortion demands, okay, because you're not doing anything illegal, so there is no these things. And also, many of the collusive bribe, okay, will be siphoned up as extortion demands. So it's not these things. What you can do is, again, there is some evidence, but I don't know how far we can stretch, is that we are making a bribe giving not legal. Essentially, it's like imputing a reward for you for whistleblowing. So it's almost a conditional in the sense, we'll encourage you to whistleblow. And if you're encouraging somebody to blow the whistle, obviously you don't want to penalize them. So I'm sympathetic, but I won't say that's should be the solution. I would still hold all of them guilty. Because you see, I don't know where to draw the boundary. Okay. Yeah. I know collusion is a big problem because that's all our talk about monitoring false flag, because we have both interests not to divulge anything. We can hide this thing. So I'm at least guilty to the extent I make, I'm complicit in the sense we are keeping it a secret. So I'm guilty to some extent.
Hi, sir. Thank you for the illuminating lecture. I found your observations on red tapeism quite fascinating. So, and you just now mentioned that we're also over-regulated. So, just surrounding that, do you also there's also a point of view that says that corruption is actually good for the economy marginally better than red tapeism because it greases the wheels and keeps it turning, whereas red tapeism grinds it to a complete halt due to the implementation of the regulation down to the hour.
Yeah. How much time do we have? I mean, that was the classic Samuel Huntington position, right? Because, nothing can be worse than a rigid bureaucracy. And I see the merit in it. I see the justification. But I can give you a reference to some of my earlier work. I don't think that's a solution to the problem that you just ignored, because remember, that's where I started with this development context a bit. Why do we still need to talk a bit about it or do something about it? And because firstly, it's going to encourage red tapeism. Okay, you are basically saying that that's what we don't want, and it's fine to justify or overlook. Okay, I don't want to use the term justify. Overlook corruption in some cases. Mind you, that's what essentially we talked about in the passive waste case. Okay, not very explicit about saying don't bother about active waste people, corrupt people. No, essentially you are saying that focus on it. So look at organizational practices where if you think that trying to control active waste, you are encouraging passive waste, don't do it. That's essentially it. But I'm not going to go that far and say that corruption is beneficial to economic growth. I find very little empirical evidence. And whatever empirical evidence we have seen is very, very qualified. Okay, that if this happens, if this happens, if this happens, then you get a positive coefficient. It's not defensible as a general result. And also, this is slightly different. So I'm not. Also, I worry about this kind of results. What do I do with it? Do I encourage countries to be corrupt because there is a positive relationship between growth and stuff like that? But red tapeism, that's why I love that result of ours, saying that no, it's got nothing to do with corruption as such. You can have very honest people also creating red tape.
Yeah. Hi. So my question is, I just want to put two parts to it.
Yeah.
So first question is, has the overall corruption reduced in the world or increased can we get a quantifiable measure? I think that maybe in terms of decades, or if I know, let's say the 70s was less corrupt than today. And adding on to this, I think the concept of corruption itself is something that has evolved over as humans evolved. So is nature not corrupt? So corruption as that concept, is that will we ever reach a stage where I think the way we look at corruption, there might actually be an innate corruption in the world itself. So let's say, I'll just give an example. Let's say if someone is inheriting a lot of wealth, but someone else is not. So there is no level playing field, right, for all humans. So in that sense, let's say we are trying to fix one form of corruption. Will it implicitly ensure that some other form of corruption does not happen?
Let's get to your second question first. Okay, so the inheritance. Okay, so we inherit. Let's say so. There is a nice concept called inequality at birth. Okay, so we are born. Let's say two children and born in two different districts, two different families, and blah. So there is inequality. Okay, so that's a fact of life. Whether it could be inheritance, it could be different countries, it could be all sorts of things. I don't see how that's related to corruption. I mean, that's a separate problem. You might say society is not doing enough to bring it down, which we all probably would agree. Okay, you might say that why isn't there a strong inheritance tax? Those kind of things we can ask. And because remember, we all, at some level or other, we would say equality of opportunity should look at that also. Okay, so it's not opportunity after you graduate from college, but it's from birth. Okay. Yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah. Fine. I'm no problem with the Darwinian evolution. I mean, that's competition, right? In fact, one of my solution to corruption problem, we didn't have time, is to raise competition, to reduce the rents. So I'm happy with some form of cutthroat competition, although not to that extent that you mentioned. But again, I won't call it corruption. Corruption is, because as I say, monopoly is profiteering. So that's closer to your example. Okay. So why are we tolerating all these monopolists who are making millions of profit? So we may not like it, but I don't want to call it that corruption. I mean, it's after all semantics, but this is the definition which it's kind of most common, more popular, and historically also present even in Kautilya, which is because remember he's talking not about the king, but king's officials taking money from the tax revenue. So it's classic tax collection problem. So it's the same definition or the same concept you're using. I agree to the extent that the public duty part is not very clear. Okay, or that might have evolved over time, and that's where the social meaning is probably coming into it, because there is some literature in the historical literature where now historians will interpret that yes, there was these transactions going on, but they never thought it was bribe. Okay, so what we call bribe, that definition or notion might have changed. So I'm willing to go that far. And your first question, no idea, but we're probably better than before. Okay. See, all these measures that we get, quantifiable measures, they're ranks and they're very perception-based measures. We have some more objective measures, but they are kind of few and far between. So you can't aggregate them and come up with the global these things. Okay. But that's do people at a micro. Okay. So the prominent one are the World Bank indicators, the control of corruption, which I used, or the corruption perception, which Transparency International might be operating in Bangalore also. So those are perception in this sense. We cannot aggregate them. but I think we are probably. There's greater awareness. The technology is helping. Previously, you had to pay for getting your benefit also. Now, nobody does. It just goes straight. So, in some sense, I'm positive. Things are better.
If you, so, yeah.
Yeah.
If you remove cash from circulation or make it very difficult to get, will it make a difference or reduce corruption? Is there any evidence to say yes or no? That
Now come back. The cashless economy will. I mean, I know all. So in that sense, that's closer to the initial technology point. Okay. If let's say payments are being straight to your bank, okay, less likely that you'll have to pay the village headman. Okay. If let's say cash disbursement, as we see in Bollywood movies, you get 100 rupees, you give 10 at the gate and come. So I mean, those are things, but in a more serious way, I mean, we do see plenty of corruption in European countries also. My last slide was an interesting one. The Belgian police caught, in December, I think, somebody taking money from African countries to argue their case in the European Parliament. And the picture shows a lot of cash. So cash is still probably being used.
Hello, sir. I'm a student of public policy. So, a lot of things have been put into perspective in terms of public sector corruption.
Yeah.
But I think the private sector also doesn't fare too well, because starting from small, petty business, there is a sense of entitlement that whatever income they are earning is theirs, and the government is someone who is bribing from them. So, that sense of entitlement and non disclosure, tax avoidance, how do we break that? And the second part of my question is that in the advent of AI, we see them replacing humans, particularly if we replace them in government departments. Do you see any hope of doing away with corruption?
Let me take the second one first. Yeah, I don't want like the sound of next. If you say we don't teach well, can we replace all the teachers by AI? No, I'm not in the displacement camp. Some routine activities, yes, I'm happy to, and it's already been done. As I said, I'm a great fan of decision making with discretion and all those things. Vision and planning and initiatives and all those kind of things, positive things, which I cannot probably build in. I'm not an expert into AI as yet. Okay, just before I came, we had a talk by the AI guru at Oxford, and he made a wonderful statement. Given that all he does is AI and stuff like this, he says, "Look, it took thousands and thousands of hours of training for this auto driving, okay, and because you have to fit in so many images, so many situations, all those kind of things. The data input is, and for a 17-year-old in the UK, on average, it takes what?" 25-30 hours of lessons, okay, for them to process and pass the test. So in some sense, yes, we still need the bureaucrats to make certain decisions based on something like this. So I'm not saying for a corruption solution, we should go that. What was the other one? Oh, the private sector. Yeah, but that's what I said. Remember that monopolist profiteering, I'm not saying it's a great idea. Or people evading taxes, or people evading GST, all those things. It's not good at all. Punish them. You have the apparatus for it. But that's not corruption. What is corruption is those who are in charge of monitoring and sanctioning them do not.
My name is Muralidhar Rao. I write a blog, I tweet also. I'm quite active on civil society activities, yes. Now, I have run a business also, and what I've been finding is you can never sack a government servant, okay? And that is why there is a clamor for government jobs. In fact, these in Bangalore, these Paura Karmikas, that is the sweepers and things like that, they were all under contract largely. very few are regularized. Recently, the government decided, and they are a very powerful lobby. They make they have some kind of a, they come onto into the media. I mean, the newspapers, etc. Whenever they agitate, etc. Since they are in Bangalore, they get a lot of coverage, and because of that, the government is worried when they cause some agitations, etc. So in stages, they go on absorbing them into the government role. And mind you, the contract workers, the Paura Karmika, his, from the contract after deductions, etc., he gets about 4,000 rupees a month. As compared to immediately he is absorbed, it goes to 45,000. That's the difference. So, I mean, it's there across the district, and that is why there are vacancies in all the department, railways, all of this. But the government has realized that once they absorb, they cannot sack them, and the efficiency goes down. And because of that, they don't want to absorb them also. So it has become a major crisis in the country. And in the case of private sector, he was saying there is this example of Delhi power supply. 2002, Shilajit Dixit government decided to privatize the power supply. And today, after by all parameters, it is a total transformation. And so corruption has reduced hugely, and you have excellent power supply and at the lowest tariff in the country. And there, mind you, even with allowing for 200 units free for the weaker sections of the society, they are able to make profits. And the government being the biggest stakeholder, they are getting the best benefit of the dividends being declared by them. So I would think that is the answer. And now the other question is, now Mamdani has taken over as the mayor of New York, and he has made a whole lot of promises. And he is a democratic socialist. Yes. What are your expectations of him? I mean, I expect you have tried to analyze and figure out what kind of a hope New York can have with his administration.
Well, thank you. I'm happy for Mamdani to be the mayor, but it's not because of the promises he has made and things like this. It's a different thing. The previous mayor had some corruption allegations and stuff. So, given my interest in the literature, I would not kind of support them. And also, it's inclusive. Okay, a Muslim mayor, so that's something I would welcome. I don't know how much scope he will have or stuff like this. I haven't looked at his campaign policies or whether they make economic sense or not. So I'll skip that one. With the privatization, yes, I do agree. In fact, people do suggest privatization as a solution to eliminate corruption problem. But the problem is, I never like to generalize in this context. Okay, we have seen, let's say, tax farming. Philippines went to the extent of privatizing tax collection. Okay, and they had to backtrack. If privatization of tax collection is a great idea, what was wrong with zamindaris? Yeah. So I don't think we should jump to these things. Yes, that's a good example of private electricity, how that has happened. Look at UK. They privatize railways now. They have become so bad that now government is thinking of renationalizing them. So we should not jump to this quick conclusion. But I do accept that there are cases where it's the same thing. When I say get rid of the intermediary, we are essentially saying, okay, get rid of the public body itself. Will probably work. But again, very context specific. Yeah.
Sorry, are you okay? Sorry. So, in your studies of countries where there's just top level corruption, at the highest levels, but then at the ground level, government organizations are largely clean, versus communities, maybe certain countries that we'll not name, where the corruption is rampant, at all levels. Is there a correlation between these two ends of the spectrum and the standard of living, the level of development, the social security that they are able to bring in?
Good question. I wish I had a clean answer to it. I can just tell you a couple of things in my defense. Okay. So when you say this correlation between, let's say, different types of corruption, okay. Now the way corruption data is collected, which is very tricky, okay. And as I said, the most popular ones are these perception based, okay. So they're not just your and mine perception, there are thousands and thousands of people. But personally, I feel that that's kind of biased against petty corruption. Okay, so or the government, that mid-level corruption. Why? Because you are asking people who do day-to-day dealing, or businessmen who have invested in those countries and stuff like this. And so they're essentially asking, how corrupt do you think that country is? Okay, so you will probably tend to ignore the big bucks. Okay, you'll focus on this day-to-day thing like this. You have heard your colleagues say, how long it takes to get a telephone connection, how much you have to pay, all those kind of things. So in some sense, that's biased. So that, that figure, that measure is not a reflective measure. So I cannot use that to answer your question, because you are also talking about, can I have a situation, let's say UK, where there might be high-level corruption, but petty corruption is non-existent. Okay, or we can talk about some of the very clean countries where probably everything is absent. So we are not yet able to make the corruption connection. But my thing is that the top one, given that the rents are so high at that level, and there, I'm not sure. So this is going beyond our talk now. Pranab Bardhan used to say a very nice thing, saying that you don't see that kind of corruption in US, UK, or the Western worlds. Why? Because you have legalized it. Okay, so lobbying is, for him, in certain spheres will be corruption, right? And so another way to solve corruption is to just legalize it. So I paid you this much money to help you make decisions, right? So that's legal. Right. So in that sense, again, so that's where we have to, if we are comparing these countries about different types of corruption, we have to consider other forms, other definitions as well. So yeah, it's not going to look clean. You need a PhD student to do this meticulously, and grind numbers and come up with this.